morning, sisters in Christ. My name is Elena Buckwater de Satalaya, and it's such a privilege and such a joy for me to be able to share with you all this morning. I grew up in the Mennonite Church in Virginia. At different points in my childhood and in my youth, I attended Crossroads Mennonite Church, Ridgeway Mennonite Church, and Mount Clinton Mennonite Church. Currently, I'm 25 years old. I live in Iquitos, Peru with my husband Freddie and our 1-year-old son Matias. We work here with Mennonite Mission Network, partnered with Virginia Mennonite Missions, and with a local church called Iglesia Cristiana Menonita. Our work here is to help with children and youth who are considered at risk. So what that means in the work that we do is the children and youth often who live farther outside of the city where there are not good opportunities for education, and where oftentimes they live in situations of pretty great poverty. So that's the work that Freddie and I are doing here. Growing up in my church, we would often receive all kinds of different missionaries from different places in the world. And it was always so interesting to me to hear their stories of the way that God was working in their churches or in the missions that they were doing in all kinds of different places. And just the creative ways that they would use to share the love of God with people that came from very different backgrounds. Even when I was pretty young, I also thought about being a missionary one day. And I'm so excited that today that's something that I get to do, and that's something that God has called me and my family to do, and it's work that we enjoy so greatly. The church here in Iquitos works primarily with children and youth. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about Iquitos, the place where we live. Iquitos is the largest city in the world that's not accessible by road. It has about 500,000 people living inside of the city, and it's growing more and more every day. The city is surrounded by 4 large rivers. The largest is the Amazon River, also the Momon, Nanay, and Icaya rivers. So in order to come into Iquitos, you either need to fly in or come in on a boat, which usually is about 3 days boat trip. But there's no highway, there's no road that leads from Iquitos to other cities in Peru or in other countries of South America. Iquitos is a very beautiful city, very hot and humid. It's right in the middle of the Amazon rainforest. So it rains almost every day, and every day is very, very, very hot. The city is constantly growing, as I think I had said earlier. The city is not only growing as far as its population, but also in size. So about 100 years ago, Iquitos was really just a port. And the reason why it's grown so much is that these 4 rivers that surround the city, all along those rivers, there are different villages and different communities where people live. So many of those people decided to come and live in Iquitos because being a port, there are so many more options for trade, for commerce, for having a good job. And so a lot of people came to Iquitos. And the city is constantly growing. Most of the land that is currently part of Iquitos started out as government land that different families came and invaded and made their own. So what often happens is that, and this happens to this day, is that the radius of Iquitos is this, but there are too many people, it's too overcrowded. And so when people have more children or when new families come in and there's not enough room for them in the city, they go to these bits of government land outside of the city. And 50 or 60 or 80 families will go there all together, and they'll build little houses. We would probably consider them shacks, very small, very simple, kind of slapped together houses. And they all live there together and bring their families. So when the government and the police realize that there are people living on their land, they go to, of course they go to kick these people off the land. But there's so many people at that point that it's very difficult for them to successfully get everyone off. Sometimes it works. If the government and police are really adamant, they can get everyone off. But it's almost more resources and more power than it's worth for them. And so oftentimes the government will end up giving this land and giving property titles and giving documentation for these different properties to make them all legal. And so that's how the city of Iquitos continues to grow. The community, the neighborhood of Rumacocha, where Freddie and I live, is one of these communities that used to be an invasion. And really almost every community, almost every neighborhood in Iquitos used to be an invasion, even close to the city center. Despite the fact that the city continues to grow, size-wise, almost all the houses still have so many people living in them. The city is tremendously overpopulated. Specifically at the very center of the city, it's very normal to have 5 or 6 families all living together in a house. Not a particularly big house either. So what often happens is that each family will live in a bedroom, and then all the families in the house will share a kitchen space or a living area or something like that, but they all live together in very tight conditions. And so, unfortunately, this leads to a lot of problems such as arguments, disputes over land, physical and sexual abuse, infidelity. Oftentimes, members of the house are just thrown out of the house if they do something that the other people don't like. And it's very easy to throw someone out of the house because there's still, 20 people living there. So these are all some of the difficulties that come just from the overpopulation in Iquitos. So my husband Freddie, who grew up here in Iquitos, knows a lot about all of these issues and about the other things that that an average Iquiteña person lives in their everyday life. So when we got married and started working full-time together with Mennonite Mission Network and Virginia Mennonite Missions, we really wanted to sit down and think, what are the ways in which we can work with the children and youth that are going to be part of our ministry that will actually benefit them and help them possibly in the future to be able to have something better. So what Freddie and I started doing is working on educational programs and on teaching special skills to these kids. So for several years we had an after-school program in a community called La Isla Iquitos, which means the Iquitos Island, and it's just about 5 minutes outside of the city along one of those rivers, along the Itaya River. So Freddie and I would go there and help kids with homework, help teach them math, and specifically we would work on reading and writing with them. Illiteracy isn't necessarily a problem in the center of the city, but oftentimes in the communities right on the outside of the city, the education is very poor, and it's hard for people to be able to learn those things. In the city center, there are some very good schools, but they're almost all private, and most families don't make enough money to send their children to these good schools. The minimum wage for a family in Peru is 1,025 soles, which is the equivalent of about $270. It's enough to be able to feed your family, and it's enough to be able to live in a house with a lot of other people. It's not enough to be able to pay rent for a house all for yourself. It's not enough to be able to send your kids to a nice private school. It covers mostly the basics, and the majority of people in Iquitos make about minimum wage. So the children who live in the very center of the city, even the public schools there in the city center are all right. They're not very bad. But as you come 15, 20, 30 minutes outside of the city to the communities like Rumacocha, where Freddie and I live, that aren't quite in the heart of the city, the education is very poor. And a lot of children go to school but don't necessarily have teachers that they understand, or don't necessarily have the tools that they need to be able to do their homework and different things. And so it's very common for children not to finish high school, or to finish high school and not have any plans to go on to study in any higher level of education. So Freddie's and my goal was to help these kids to be able to understand better what they're learning in school, and also to have some special skills that they can use later on when they want to get a job or something. So in addition to the math, the academic reinforcement, and the literacy training, we also were teaching English classes, and during a time we were also teaching, we weren't teaching, but we had some professors from the city that came and were teaching guitar lessons, piano lessons, voice lessons, drum lessons, all with the idea that these kids can have some kind of special skill. Oftentimes there's not much expected from these children, and so it's really great for them to be able to have something besides just what they learn in school or what they do with their friends, some kind of special skill that they can do, like playing an instrument or speaking English. So our hope is that by helping these kids to be able to understand better what they're learning in school, and by providing them with some kind of special skill, that they would be able to finish high school, maybe even get a scholarship, or work so that they can go to college, or go to some kind of a trade school, so that hopefully in the future they might be able to even make more than minimum wage. They might be able to have a small house just for themselves and their family. Or they might even be able to travel and see other parts of the world and the way of life there. So that's some of the work that Freddie and I do. And I say that some of it that we have done because the main the main academic reinforcement program that we were doing, we're not doing at this moment, which I'll talk about a little bit more in a minute. So those are a few of the things that Freddie and I have focused on in our ministries. The church that we work with is also very focused on children and youth ministry. Our church is only 10 years old. It was started 10 years ago by Colombian missionaries who are currently our pastors. But before that, about 20 years ago, or a little more than maybe 25 years ago, one of our pastors, whose name is Ceci, started a kids ministry in the center of the city for kids that were selling candy on the street or shining shoes, or doing different things there to make a little bit of money so that they could get food. So she started bringing games, dances to Christian songs, Bible lessons, lunch for these kids, and started having a kids ministry with them every Saturday. And that ministry continued to grow and grow. And as it grew, the children brought their families, and the families asked what was the church that this was connected to. And that is how our Mennonite church came to be. This pastor, Ceci, who started this kids ministry, her husband from Colombia was connected to a Mennonite church there. And so he started a Mennonite church here in Iquitos, which is the church that we attend. To this day, the church is still mostly focused on kids ministry and youth ministry. And so in 4 different areas of the city, they have these kids clubs that meet together every Saturday. And they have youth ministries that also meet Saturday in the evenings. And it's still like it was at the time when this kids ministry started. The kids get together and play games. We sing songs with them and have them dance to Christian songs. They have a Bible class and afterwards lunch, and then they go home. So Freddie and I are also involved with those ministries that the church is doing, with kids and with youth group as well, which is a special time for the kids to get together, for the youth to get together. And learn a little bit more profoundly about the love of God and about the Bible, and spending some time together as youth. As I mentioned earlier, Freddie and I currently aren't doing our academic reinforcement program. For one thing, a lot of things changed for us when we had a baby. It's not quite as easy to spend every hour of every day in ministry like we did before. Now that we have a child. But the other very unfortunate thing is that last year, in August, almost a year ago, there was a terrible fire on the Isla ministry, on the Isla community where we had ministry. The fire burnt down the church building, it burnt down 5 other homes, and after that fire, the church, Freddie and I, who were leaders of that ministry, together with our church, were looking at how we needed to work at that ministry. And there were a lot of changes that needed to happen since the church building wasn't there, since several of the kids who came to ministry had lost their homes. And so since Freddie and I at that time were also thinking about traveling back to the U.S. soon, we decided that was an important time for us to step down as leaders and help with the ministry, but not be directing it anymore. So a different couple from church started directing the ministry. Freddie and I helped them for about 5 months until they felt like they were ready to take on that ministry themselves. And at that point, the church moved us to the ministry here in Rumacocha. Our church has a ministry here in Rumacocha where Freddie and I live. And it's been really beautiful for us to be able to work here, helping out with the kids ministry. I teach English classes as well. Freddie helps out with singing at church as well as with preaching. And the really special thing is that since we live close by, we're able to have kids over sometimes, but especially the youth. The youth that go to youth group here at church, oftentimes in the evenings will come to our home to eat dinner with us, to play with my tias, to watch a movie, to do different kinds of things. And that's been really special. Something especially that I've been doing recently that's been really meaningful to me is on Sunday evenings I've been doing, with a few young women close to my house, I've been doing something called Tiempo de Chicas, which just means time for women, or girl time. Where these girls come over, we make food, we sit down together and eat, and we read a story in the Bible of some woman who we find in the Bible that we can read her story and we can talk about her life and talk about what's going on in our lives and share time together, pray for one another, help carry each other's burdens. It's been a very special time to me, especially hearing these young women's questions and the things that are going on in their lives, and getting to pray for one another. That's been really special to me. And I especially wanted to share that with you all because I know that this morning you are also having some time together as women to fellowship, to pray for one another, to share one another's burdens. And I just pray that that's especially a really meaningful time for you all, and that you're able to feel the Holy Spirit's presence there and to leave this prayer breakfast encouraged and filled with God's love and filled with the Holy Spirit. Thank you so much for listening, for being willing to hear about our ministry here, and for your prayers. God bless you all. Have a wonderful day.